Hey, my friends, welcome back to the Uncommodified podcast and to another UNCORK conversation. Today, my guest on the show is Sarah Windsor. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Awesome. Now, full disclosure, for those of you who are listening in or watching the YouTube channel, yes, we are related. We are related by marriage. Sarah is married to my nephew, Jeremy, who is my brother Terry's youngest son. And I actually performed Jeremy and Sarah's wedding, which some of you who listen to the podcast are thinking, are you kidding me? You used to marry people? Yes, this is part of a past life for me, so quite interesting. How long have you guys been married now, Sarah?
So this is 22 years next year. So we're
Oh my gosh. Well, I just want you to know you're like one of only a handful of people that I married that actually survived. So so good on you guys. Look at you guys. Look at you guys go. That's awesome. That's awesome. And I had the chance of spending some time with Jeremy. Jeremy was down in town in Kitchener from out west where you guys live maybe about a month or a month and a half ago, and had a chance to connect, and that was really great. So I've been wanting to have Sarah on my show for a long time, and part of it's because I follow Sarah on social media and I watch what she posts and I get intrigued by it and I love it. And we're going to tuck into that today, what she does for a living and what she does out of her passion. And we're going to explore how she came to this place and what that all looked like. But a little bit of her journey. Sarah's an artist and she loves creating in lots of different medias. And I that's what I really like. Acrylic, watercolors, collage, ink, wood burning, digital design, jewelry making. You do a little bit of everything, I think. Is that fair to say, Sarah?
Yeah, there's probably still a lot I could do, but...
you will keep experimenting. I love
Yeah.
it. Now, you were originally trained in watercolors and printmaking, but you've really adapted those skills over the years to do new mediums that you wanted to work in. I know you do a lot of digital art, but also the combination of digital art that I can see online on a screen, but then the physical stuff that you do in jewelry and cards, stuff that you can wear, stuff you can touch with your hands. I love all the versatility. And although I'm not an artist, I guess maybe what I do is a form of art. Podcasting, I suppose, is a form of art. But I am intrigued by the artistic mind because I believe there's so much for all of us to understand. And I think maybe there's an artist, maybe, inside of all of us at some level. I don't know. My art would not be as beautiful as yours, Sarah, but it's a possibility. But we're going to explore that. But before we do that, this is an uncorked conversation, so we're going to uncork a drink together. Sarah, what are you drinking tonight?
I have a BC Chardonnay.
Oh, a BC Chardonnay. I like it. Now, I have, for those of you, I got a Flying Monkeys Adventures in Time Surfing. Now, this is actually a double IPA. I like it. And for those on the YouTube channel, strangely matches this psychedelic shirt that I have. So, all right, let me crack this open, and we'll see where we go. Cheers.
Cheers.
That's a great beer. All right, Sarah, let's dive in.
Okay.
What drove your passion for art and to become an artist? I mean, you've been doing this a long time, but I want you to go back. What was the initial impetus that began to drive you in this direction, do you think?
Yeah, I've thought about this, and you think back, well, when did that passion start? As a kid, I always drew. And I remember being in the car with my two sisters. I'd be in the middle in the back seat, and I have my coloring book, and I just always draw in color. And funny enough, I loved cartoons as a kid, as many children do. But I didn't love them because they were cartoons. I now realize I loved them because of the visuals. And a lot of the cartoons I liked were quite fantasy, visually encompassing in a sense. And my grandfather came for a visit. We were born in England. They came from England. And he noticed right away that I was obsessed with cartoons. And he told me, he said, you know what she's going to be? She's going to be a cartoonist. I'm sure of it. And it's funny when I remember that memory because I'm like, I never held on to that and thought, oh yes, my grandfather saw the talent in me. But it's come back to me in my adulthood, and I remember that very distinctly. And I'm like, I wonder if that kind of planted a seed.
That's interesting. That is interesting. And maybe, again, maybe you didn't remember that for a long time, but maybe there is something that happens when people sort of speak into our lives or communicate something that they see in us that we don't see in ourselves, and maybe it does plant a seed that potentially bears fruit years later. So that's a fascinating piece of the journey. So you haven't always done art, though. No. You have had different maturations of your career. And at times, I'm assuming your art paid you some or a bit, like an artist. I suppose the starving artist label is never good for an artist, but you gain some income from art, but you've done lots of different things along the way in your journey as well. Just help us understand a little bit about your journey.
Sure. Well, I did end up going to university for fine art, but after doing a year and a half in science, and
Yeah.
it wasn't because I wasn't doing well in science. I did actually really well, but I literally saw people walking around campus with their portfolios and going into the art building, and I was like, I want to do that. What am I doing? And so even though I did it in school and I graduated, it was tough. I didn't do any post-education after that to kind of narrow in on like graphic design or go to textile school or anything. And this was quite some time ago, so the arts certainly weren't as available as they are in schooling as they are today, I'd say. So after that, got into fitness because I did fitness in university. I taught aerobics, and I got into personal training as well, and I did that for quite some time. And then I kept thinking, how am I going to do something creative? I didn't want to go to school again. I was done with school, and I was like, I got to figure this out. And I had a client who I happened to mention that I wanted to do something creative, and she's like, you need to talk to my husband. He's a programmer for a software company. So I ended up working for them. I got into marketing, and I found that satisfied some creative needs for sure, and I could use my creative talents there, and kind of done smatteries of marketing throughout my career on and off. I've had my own personal training business during my career as well, where I had my own women's fitness facility. And, people always think, oh, really? That's what you did? I'm like, but there's a creative component to doing that as well. Just like you say, you can probably find an artist in everyone, and there's creativity and everything. And when you are creative, you do bring it into your job no matter what. So, and then return to marketing, moving out west, working for a couple ski companies. And my husband and I got into snowboarding together pretty early on in our relationship, and we started traveling out west and fell in love with the mountains. And then since then, I now kind of have my own marketing consulting, graphic design, web design. That's where I make some money and make still a little bit of money from my art on the side. So yeah.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing, because I think over the years what I've learned, Sarah, just in my own life, that sometimes your passion pays and sometimes it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of respect for people who pursue their passion and their craft regardless of whether it pays them or not, because I think sometimes we get locked into this idea that, well, I can only do it, or maybe I only want to do it if it pays. And I do think that really truncates our expression in some really problematic ways.
Absolutely.
And so I love, like, I have lots of friends who are artists, graphic artists, visual artists, musicians, and they're in that same boat. And what I do love that passionate pursuit that you see in them, where they're pursuing something regardless of whether it actually pays the bills or not, but it satisfies something deep within them. And at the end of the day, that to me is the bigger piece.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because one of my questions to you is, you've lived across geography. When I first met you guys, you lived where I live today in Kitchener, about an hour west of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. You now live in the middle of this idyllic, beautiful place in British Columbia, in Canada, in Revelstoke, in the middle of the mountains. It's such a glorious place. It's so beautiful. How has that affected or shaped your art, do you think? The geography in which you're observing?
Well, and I think that's a great point, because when we were traveling out west for vacations, that's when the thoughts kind of came in my head that I got to get back to art. Because it does, if you're moved by nature and it does evoke that in you, that you need to express that. It did for me anyway. Not that I needed to replicate what I see, but just need to vibe off what I get from that energy in an environment like that. Because I absolutely adore nature. The mountains are stunning. So the scenery certainly inspires you, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, I'm just thinking, I did a small short podcast, a couple months ago. I think it's called something like Cathedral Spaces. And it was just all about my own return to nature, because In the last couple of years, my wife and I, Pam, have started camping and being out in nature more. We never really did that a lot. And I'm realizing that there's something about being connected in nature that is very powerful. It's become a cathedral, what I would call a cathedral space for me, a place where I find something bigger than myself around me and what's happening. And part of what I love in seeing some of your art that you do now is that it's because it's got that nature element to it. It evokes those same feelings and emotions for me when I see it. You're not doing realism in your art, but that same form and function somehow for me elicits the same feeling and response, which is really interesting about how art plays with that in our mind. It's a really fascinating thing to me.
For sure.
Interesting. So now you're at a point in your life where you've got you do some marketing, you got a marketing business, you got some digital art, you do website design, all of that, but then you've got this expression of art. So in your life these days, what are you specifically and uniquely passionate about? What are you most passionate about these days in your work and your career?
I'd say it's kind of what you hit on. It's really targeting that cerebral kind of experience in my art and pushing myself a little deeper. It's hard sometimes because I am very visual in that I love color, I love patterns, and so things often look fun and light. And I still, for me, I want to get deeper and a little bit darker, not necessarily like really dark, but a little bit more higher level, like when you come to like more in a spiritual sense in some ways when it comes to my art. So that's kind of where I see myself going, and I totally agree with you about the monetary rewards with art. For me, it almost pushes me away sometimes to feel you have to do that. I do markets, I sell it, but it's not why I do it, and I don't like having to feel pressure to make money from it, because that, for me, it debilitates me completely. I'm not a manufacturer. I really don't like having to pump out a bunch of stuff to sell it. It's not my favorite thing. I'd rather take the time and make, a piece that's really deep and meaningful to me. But unfortunately, if you are trying to make some kind of monetary reward from your art, you've kind of got to do make some cards, make some prints, and that kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's a delicate balance there. Interesting. So when you talk about exploring the spirituality or the spiritual nature of the art you're doing or the things you're seeing, what does that look like to you today? Like when you think about that?
I think really it's opening my mind. I'm trying to find more space, whether it's in my day or my week, to just let my mind kind of wander a little more and be free and let those visuals, because for me, I usually see a lot of my art before I make it. I don't just start creating and it comes together usually. It's usually I get a vision, and a lot of times it comes in my sleep or on early awakening, right? When your mind's kind of in that mode. And I usually have to see it first. And it doesn't have to be like a finished form, but it has to be some element or some kind of concept that I have to see. And I typically then go sketch it out. It'll be a really rough sketch. And it doesn't mean I act on it right there and then. Oftentimes I've gone back to my sketchbook and I'm like, oh yeah, that was a cool idea. Let's do that. And so for me, I just keep trying to push myself to kind of let my mind open, because if I get full jammed of all kinds of things like, oh no, I've got to make this much money this month from art and I haven't sold this lately, or like I get really closed off, and my creativity just like shuts down completely.
Interesting. So somehow when you're, let's say, when you're dreaming or you're in this early awakening state, you're tapping into something, seeing something in your mind, however you describe that, and that actually becomes part of the form in which you're using to create, which is that's very interesting. That's an interesting process. Do you think that, I've had this conversation with several people on my podcast before, do you think that kind of intuitive seeing, I don't know if that's the right word, do you think is it a skill? Is it a learned skill? Is it a gift? Is it a curse?
I think it's all those things.
What is it?
I don't know. I guess, I don't really know, because all my life people are like, oh, you're so creative, and I'm always like, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? And I think, obviously we show talent, that's a tangible thing, and people are like, oh, you can draw, oh, you can sculpt. But for me, yeah, it is a very intangible thing. I think it does come from having a lot of imagination as a kid. I would say I played a lot by myself. I have sisters that are 5 and 7 years older than me. And so I remember making up a lot of really creative games and things to entertain myself. And I think maybe it is partly natural. My parents, though they wouldn't say they're creative, they are. My dad was a drafting engineer, so he physically used his hands to draw things. And my mother is amazingly talented in many things. So I think some of it might be hereditary. Some of it might be a gift and also a curse. Because creative people, I think, are always, well, I'm super critical of myself. So, and I'm always pushing myself. And sometimes, yeah, it's that pressure where you think, this isn't good enough. Maybe I'm not good enough. So maybe I should stop doing my art, right? So it's interesting. But then that nagging thing always comes back and says, no, you have to make stuff. Just make it, Sarah. Forget about what it means. Forget about if anybody likes it or not. Just do it. So
just make it.
Yeah.
You know what? And listen, if you're listening in today, I always say to you, my listeners, that you're listening in for a reason. I just want to park on this for a second. You know, if you've got a nagging voice in your head that's telling you that's just not good enough, you know, that might be something to be attentive to, but also to, you know, I think every once in a while we need to say, you know what, fuck the naysayers in our head. And what does good enough mean? To what standard? And just doing it, you know, if you intuitively sense something, just doing it, there's something powerful in that. And I know from talking to other people on the podcast, that's a big part of their journey. And it is for me as well. I'm the same thing. My podcast was just do it. And I'm about 95% finished writing a book, which I may never sell a copy, but I really don't care. Because I had this idea, and I said, I'm just going to do it. And, you know, whether it's good or good enough or whatever, it's an expression of who I am and what's important to me. And for that sake and that sake alone, it has value. If it has monetary value or work to other people beyond that, I suppose that's icing on the cake. That's wonderful, but it's not the reason why I'm creating that. And that's a hard barrier to get over. And that's an interesting way as you describe that dance in your own head, because I think all of us have lots of different voices and narratives in our head that actually keep us from doing the thing we might have been created to do.
Right.
That's interesting. Okay, I got to ask this question. Here's my $1 million question for you.
Okay.
So I've been watching you online for a long time, and I see your art, and I see a reoccurring image in your art. It's the mushroom, okay, Sarah? And I go, why the mushroom? Now, I love the mushroom. I think the mushroom appears in many different forms in your art, and in different places, and sometimes in unexpected places. It seems like all of a sudden, hey, there's a mushroom. What's going on with the fungi, Sarah? You got to tell me.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of this myself. And again, I go back to the cartoons. I did watch the Smurfs a lot. It was my favorite.
Okay.
And so I'm like, oh, that's kind of cliche. But I'm like, but you know what? That comes into your subconscious, right? Like those visuals. And I laugh because people love mushrooms. Like, even if you're not like a mushroom lover, they're like, I love this. It's got mushrooms in it. And you're like, why? But I'm also very, very fascinated with them as a creature, like as an organism. They're incredibly amazing as far as what they do for the earth. There's so many amazing different species of them, and they come in all different kinds of colors, shapes, sizes, you name it. They're fascinating that way, and that's the science part of my brain that really is. And I remember that from high school, you know, learning the spores that you did on the imprint that you did with the mushroom cap and stuff. I don't know. I think I even liked them then, but they kind of creeped in, and I don't really know when they creeped in. I don't know.
Well, all I can say is I have to laugh because whenever I see something, when you post something, I'm always thinking, there's a post coming from Sarah. I'm like, where's Waldo?
Yeah.
Where's the mushroom? Where's the mushroom going to be this time in the art? But I do find mushrooms quite fascinating for the same reason that you're talking about, because I've been doing some reading about these systems and how they all work together, and it is so fascinating because it's like humbling in some ways. Like
Yeah.
this little mushroom that seems so, parochial.
Right.
They are fascinating organisms,
Yeah.
really.
They are.
And so, listen, if you're listening into the program, you ought to Google what's so amazing about mushrooms after. Now, you're going to get some weird responses potentially if you do that. And some of you who I have a white shirt on. No, it's not. If you're on the different kind of mushroom, this shirt is white. No, it's not white. Just a joke. Just a joke for you mushroom lovers. I have to admit, I did like some different kinds of mushrooms when I was younger. Not so much anymore for me, but fair enough. Okay, listen, let's get more serious for a second, Sarah. Listen, what is life teaching you? So you're going on this journey. You've been married 21 years. You've had these moves. You're in this place you love, in the middle of the mountains. You're doing creative things. That's all great, but what's the universe teaching Sarah these days?
I think it's to keep driving for, like you said, keep unveiling the layers of yourself to get to that core passion. And for me, that's a constant process. And it's affected by so many different things, right? What's happening in your life at the time, like you said, moves or jobs or whatever's going on that way, but also what you're allowing yourself to kind of think about, really, like how deep you can go into your mind in some ways. For me, I think that's kind of like where I'm at right now as far as like seeking that out for sure. Going, I don't know. I can't really say that it's teaching me. It's teaching me that I have to keep going. That's what it's teaching me. Don't stop. Don't give up on your passion. Like I said, don't let the outside influences, your book, whatever, opinions affect it. Just keep pushing. And I think that for me is to wake up every day and have that outlet is really important. If I didn't have that in my life, I don't know, I'd be pretty miserable.
No, that's interesting. And as you talk, there's three words that are just starting to percolate for me. We got this idea of passion. You talked about pursuit, but you also talked about just this idea of just pushing.
Yeah.
And I think like these words are starting to align for me in the conversation. We are passionate. We get discouraged. We get confused. We get conflicted. Then we start to pursue something with a rigor, and then sometimes we just gotta keep pushing. We gotta keep pushing through and in and up and all different directions. And I loved what you said, just uncovering the layers of who we are. I mean, I think, and maybe I don't know if it's a product of aging for me. I'm going to be 58 this year, and I was 20 yesterday. In some ways, my wife might say I was 20 yesterday, just in the way I acted. Life is so short, and we are these interesting layers, and in some ways, I guess we're sort of like the mushroom. You take off that cap, and there's intricacy and a complexity to the layers within that thing, and I guess that's sort of like you and I. And maybe when we find that thing that we love to do, our passion, maybe when we find that thing that gives us that creative boost, maybe we start to find different layers of ourselves. My wife and I, we watched a documentary the other night on David Bowie. And man, oh man, I was just so struck again by this guy. Was super crazy creative, and just getting out all the things that were in his head visually, which were both wonderful and strange,
Yeah.
both wonderful and dark and light and all this stuff. But what an amazing creator, and maybe those kind of things are locked within all of us, which is really interesting to look at. So you're learning about your passion. You're learning to keep pursuing, to keep pressing in, even when it doesn't pay. And again, I think that's an important part. If you're waiting, if you're listening in and you're waiting for your passion to pay, you might wait a hell of a long time and never ever do the thing that you actually wanted to do, which would be a life full of regrets. And that's what I do respect also, Sarah. I like watching you from, a sense. We don't talk very much. We haven't talked a lot. I think the last time we saw each other was a number of years ago in Kelowna.
Right,
I think we just connected briefly. I was there on business. I think you were there on a vacation with Jeremy and with maybe Terry and Ruby.
Just Terry, yeah.
Maybe just Terry.
Yeah.
and you guys had rented that Airbnb, and I think we just connected a bit. But again, because I see and watch you on social media, I'm seeing what you're posting. I really am interested in that journey, and that's the reason why I wanted to have the conversation, because I think there's a lot of people out there that want to do things. Pam's an example. I mean, I bought Pam art lessons last year for her birthday. She'd never drawn or painted in her life. And we have a friend who's an artist and a art psychotherapist, and I got lessons from her. And Pam is all of a sudden creating things and painting and enjoying it, and she's doing it primarily for herself. But I'm also seeing her find a different layer of herself in the process. So I really believe there's something powerful in that, and that is a gift that you are discovering and exploring for sure. So listen, if people wanted to connect with you, if they wanted to find you, if they wanted to find your art, if they wanted to find out more about who you are, how would they do that?
Well, I have a website.
Okay.
Do you want me to say it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely
elementsdesignworks.com is my website.
Okay.
And then same
Okay.
handle for social, both on Instagram and Facebook. And that would be how you find me.
Okay, so Elements Design.
Elements
So-
Design Works. I know, it's really long.
Works.
It came,
No, it's fine.
It came from an exhibit I did, and it was all about
Okay.
the elements of nature. And
Okay.
that's when that was the first exhibit I did, and I had to think of a business name, and I was like, I wanted to include that, because I'm like, I'm always going to have some element of nature, some influence, whether you see it or not. I know it's been influenced by nature, so that's where the name came from, but yeah.
Well, you're in the right province, I think. What do they say about British Columbia? What do they say, beautiful by nature or something?
I think they
Or
say
something like that.
Bring cash.
Yeah. Well, bring cash too. We can do that. We got to bring cash when you go to BC, because it's an expensive place. But it is idyllic.
It is.
It is
Beautiful
out
BC,
there.
yeah.
So, what would be your best advice to somebody who thinks they want to explore their creative side, but is absolutely petrified to do it? What would your best Sarah advice be to them?
You just got to do it. Go get whatever material you want. Like, go buy some paints at the dollar store. It doesn't matter. Just do something. And I think it's very freeing. I'm just like Pam's experiencing. Once you do that you're like, it's fun, right? First of all, it's fun. And if you just let go of like the fear of, oh my God, it's going to be the ugliest thing ever, then you have fun in the process. And I think if you're attracted to that, or if it's writing, or if it's whatever creative outlet, music, I think you'll find that joy in it. And I think if you can just unhinge yourself from all of the expectations and just dive in and just try something. And if you don't like it, maybe you won't like it. Maybe you've always fantasized about being this, and then you get into it and you're like, ooh, this is not what I want. This is not vibing with me at all. And that's possible. But I would just say, just do it. I hate to steal the slogan, but you really just have to do it.
It's good. It's good. And you know what? That's really good advice. And if you're listening in, what expectations do you have to unhinge yourself from? That is, maybe you need to pause the podcast for a second and just ask yourself, what expectation yourself or others or societies or whatever, your social construct, your economic situation, your gender expectation, whatever it is, what expectation do you have to unhinge yourself from? First of all, I love the word because it's a very visual image. Like I almost can see in my mind taking the screws off the hinge and just getting that restrictive hinge off so you can open this thing up and not be connected to it in an unnatural way. It's very powerful advice. And again, if you're listening in, I really encourage you to ask yourself, what does that mean to you today? What unhealthy expectation, yourself or someone else's, do you need to unhinge yourself from? It's a really provocative idea. Sarah, as you know, this is the Uncommodified podcast. And for me, that is all about understanding that we were born in an intrinsically uncommodified, unique state. I think over time, I know over time, we learn to conform and fit in so that we can be accepted and acceptable. And I actually believe that is a problem in the human journey. And I'm all about, for me in this stage of my life, encouraging myself and others to find that unique offering that they have and bring it into the world, present it to the world for the benefit of others. So my question to you is, when you walk in a room or you go to a place and you're bringing and being your unique self, the only thing that Sarah can bring in that room, because Sarah's a unique individual, what does that look like? What are you doing in that moment that is uniquely you?
Usually cringing on the inside.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I don't. I'm not an overt person. I'm not an extrovert. A lot of the times,
Okay.
I can be if I'm in a very comfortable situation. I can be, but for me, I always just try and be me. I think no matter if I am cringing on the inside or whatever I'm experiencing, I don't try to be anything different. I just listen to myself and just be myself. And I try to listen a lot. Like if I go into a social situation where it's a party, I just try to observe. Because I'm so visual, it's fascinating to me, and I often get caught up in just what's happening around and not really focusing on what's in front of me. But I think that's kind of neat too, because I take those things in kind of subconsciously as well, like my environment. But for me, I try and be me. I just try to not worry about who I am, and if I fit in or I don't fit in, it's just who I am.
Well, you know what, and that's the essence of being uncommodified,
Yeah.
is being comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
And as you know, a lot of people are not comfortable in their own skin, particularly in social settings where to be me, whatever that means, for us to be that a unique expression of who we are, isn't often the acceptable way of looking at that. We go into an environment and we have to somehow trade me for the me that people want or expect. And I think that's a dangerous trade-off.
Yes.
Because at least in my own life, I think over time what I've learned is the more I trade me for what you want me to be, the less I know who I am. I actually think that's what happens over time. And I do think my own experience that over time, sometimes as we trade ourselves for the version of ourselves that people expect, and maybe this goes back to expectations, is that we trade ourselves in for something that we think people want for us or from us. And that is an evil trade-in eventually, because I think then we go through a crisis of understanding, well, who are we anymore? And maybe it goes back and speaks a little bit to the business component that you do, the art that you do. Again, so much of my world over the years in the corporate world has been defined by the business card. I am what I am because the business card says I am.
Right.
I am this. This is my identity, which is really the job I do. It's not who I am. It's just a job title. And I went through my own crisis, I think, in a season of my life where many, many years ago, where I didn't have a job and I didn't have a card, and I really went through a free fall of trying to figure out, well, who am I then? Like, if I don't have a title and I don't have a job as a man, who am I? And that was disconcerting. And I went through a free fall for a number of years of trying to figure out, well, if I don't have all that, who am I? Now, I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because in the end of that free fall, when my feet hit some solid ground, the solid ground was, I'm not what I do. I don't have to be defined by my job description or my job title. And that's also what I like about your journey, because you've been part of corporations and you've worked in corporations and you have your own business. But I think as I watch you and observe you from the outside, it's something that you really have been careful that you don't want to be defined by.
Absolutely. And I don't even want to be defined as an artist. That may sound silly. And I think when I go to exhibits or if I go to artisan fairs and I have a booth, I'm always interested because I'm like, what do people think you are, right? Like, and then they look at my work and
Oh, shoot. Oh, did your laptop run out of battery? Oh, Sarah. Hello.
Hi, welcome to being in BC, remote BC.
That is so funny. That is so
we
funny.
that does not happen a lot. Actually, I was quite shocked.
That's okay. It's okay. So listen, I'm just gonna let it run, and either we'll stitch it together, or it'll just be a funny
Okay.
moment. For those of you listening and on the YouTube channel, all of a sudden Sarah just went into nether no land. She was gone, and apparently that's just internet in the mountains. So she's gone. And I'm like, uh-oh, I'm just calling Jeremy like, what happened? Did she get transported to a mushroom world?
Maybe.
What the hell
I
happened?
hope so.
Sarah's gone to a mushroom world. Where's Sarah? Listen, so where you were talking about, you're at these trade shows, and
Yeah.
people are looking at your art, and they're
Yeah.
trying to figure out, I guess, who you are.
Yeah. Some are, and some are just looking at it as a beauty, and they're like, "Oh, this is so pretty." But I really take a joy when people like you look at it and see more depth in it. And I'm always like, and I've gotten a few comments, and people are like, "Wow, your mind is like deep," and I'm like, "Thank you."
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be that. It's there, and they recognize that. And I think that's where I don't want to be called an artist, because I'm not trying to be a shape. I'm not trying to
Right.
be a watercolor artist or a realist. Like, I'm just trying to literally express myself
Yeah.
and literally bring joy into my own life.
Yeah, and I appreciate that about the work, and I'm really glad that we connected again in this way, and I asked you to come on the show, because I mean, embarrassingly, we could have this conversation anytime we want, but we don't, and I didn't. And so I'm really glad that we're having this conversation, because it's getting me back into this world and all this. I got one last question for you, because we didn't really touch on this, but you do some very small scale work. Like,
Yes.
like very small scale. Like what's the smallest scale that you work on? Like it's like
Like the
earrings.
actual dimensions?
Yeah, like it's
oh,
like
yeah.
like you work on very small scale earrings.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you paint or whatever you're doing so intricately at such small scale? Because that is fascinating to me.
Very carefully.
Very good answer.
No, it's true. Like, it's actually, and I do a lot of line work and a lot of patterning, and for me, it's incredibly meditative.
Wow.
And so I think I go small because I like to do so much detail, and it's challenging, but it's almost like a little world in itself. Like, I don't know why I like very detailed things, but yeah, I do. It's hard. It's not easy, and it is slow, especially when you wood burn. Wood burn is quite tricky, and you have to get the speed down, or else your lines are all in and out. But yeah, I do go small scale.
Yeah,
I'm
you do,
really
and it's
fun about
fascinating
that.
to me. And I really like what you just said, because again, there's something I heard. Sometimes when I'm having these conversations with people, I don't know, maybe it's my dream-like state or something, but it's like I hear things that aren't quite being said, but I hear them in my mind in a certain way that really resonates. So what I just heard you say is, go small to go deep. So if I want to go deep into something, going small, getting small, observing at a smaller, almost micro level, somehow brings us into the vastness. Actually, within the smallness is this sense of vastness. So, and maybe that's true in our lives, that sometimes when we go big, we don't find the depth that we're looking for. And when we go small and we get focused, we find the intricacies of the patterns in the things we're looking at. Maybe we find the intricacies in the patterns of our life. Like, that is a very interesting idea for me. And again, if you're listening and if it's the first time you're listening, welcome to the crazy world that is my brain. And my brain is sort of like my shirt. It's sort of like all over the place at times. But, that's a great provocation for me. And, going small to go deep and to find something of interest, that is really, really, really quite captivating for me in relationship to what does that mean to me. Where in your life do you need to go small? Do you need to get more focused, become a little more intricate to find something different? And you figure out, if you're listening in, where that applies to your life. Sarah, listen, really appreciate chatting with you today. Thanks for coming on the show and chatting. Listening, if you're listening in, again, you listen for a reason. If you want to connect with Sarah, you can connect with her. Again, where are they going to connect with you at social media? What is it, the handle?
Elements design works.
Element design works, and it does work. I like that. Element design works. And if you want to connect with me, please connect with me on social media or email me at tim@theuncommodified.com and let me know how this conversation is impacting you and what are you thinking about. And more importantly, not what you're thinking about, what are you doing as a result of the conversation? I'm going to ask you to thoughtfully consider, why are you listening and what do you want to do in your life? What expectation do you want to unhinge from? What passion do you want to pursue? What pursuit do you have to have? What pressing in and pushing in means to you? And ultimately, I suppose, at the end, what is going small to find something of greater depth in your life? Maybe your life has become too big. Maybe you need to become more focused on smaller things, work in smaller scale, and find something of significance. Thanks for listening in. Have a great day. Go out and uncommodify your world. Paint, do art, sing, do music, dance, or just go to work. Do what you need to do, but express your unique self and just be you when you get in the room. That was great advice, Sarah. Thanks for your time today. Have a great day.
Thank you.